Hello, welcome to our Friday helping of You Are My Borough, our second this week. I'm Dom Shaw and I'm joined by Scott Wilson, both of the Northern Echo. The plan was to take you behind the scenes in Swansea, and by behind the scenes, I mean in your travel lodge hotel
in my
room.
beautiful travel lodge, yeah.
Yeah, but the snow's put paid to those plans, as it so often does.
Yes, everything's a bit up in the air, Dom. So we're filming this in the morning. The plan was to set off early today and drive down to Swansea because I've got to get back after the game tomorrow, and it's a bit of a mission all in one day. But obviously the snow came down, Littleland schools have got cancelled, work's up in the air, blah, blah, blah. So so the plan at the minute is probably set off for Swansea kind of mid-afternoon and have a slow drive down there late on, and then I'm still down for the game tomorrow. So we will be down at Swansea at some stage, but not yet. I suspect it's going to be an interesting trek across the country with a bit of snow and some Friday traffic thrown in.
And I didn't tee you up on this to be the weatherman, but there's no suggestion that the games are going to be under threat this weekend, is there? This is going to be easy by the time.
No, I don't think so. I mean, by all accounts, Swansea actually had a reasonable bit of snow yesterday, so there was snow kind of lying around the ground. I saw some pictures last night. I think they've had some more. But like the rest of the country, I think it's meant to start kind of thawing out from about lunchtime today. Odd flurries maybe tonight and tomorrow. But I mean, the Premier League and Championship grounds now are kind of so good in terms of the undersoil heating and stuff like that in general, the problems only come if it's really snowing on a match day, and then you've got the issue of fans getting in, the surrounds of the grounds, all that kind of stuff. So no, all the indications are that it's going to be on a clearly worst case scenario, as fans will know. And listen, I get paid to do this, so I'm really not complaining. There's 1,500 Borough fans meant to be at the game tomorrow, which is yet again remarkable for the opposite end of the country at this time of the year. But worst case scenario is you get down there, the game's called off in the morning, isn't it? What's the worst you've ever had? Birmingham's the worst I've had. I've got to Birmingham before, and I'm pulling into the car park, and the game was called off. I think that was a Sunderland match.
I don't think I've had any absolute shockers.
One of the lads about 10 or 15 years ago, Darlington were playing at Exeter, and they went all the way down to Exeter on a midweek for a Darlington game, and that was called off about 2 hours before. That's got to be about the worst, hasn't it?
I wasn't there, but didn't Borough have one abandoned at Ipswich?
Yes.
In maybe Mowbray's era?
Yes, I wasn't there for that either, but yes, they did. Yeah.
And then there was the famous Leicester one.
That wasn't that. That was unbelievable. That was a really, anyone who was at that game, that was a brutal drive down. Like the M1 was literally one lane, and it was barely one lane. It took forever to get there. Coming off the M1 to the King Power, which it's 2 or 3 miles. That took about 2 hours. It was unbelievable. I genuinely thought I was going to be dumping my car. At every point, I thought the game was going to be called off. So I was constantly on the phone to the press officer of Borough and everything. It was because it was Sky, wasn't it? That's the only reason.
I'm sure didn't the players have to jump off the coach from half a mile away?
Yeah, the players couldn't get in. Yeah, the players couldn't get in. They had to kind of walk the last bit through the snow. It was just ridiculous. And the problem is as well in that scenario, when you're covering the game, and I'm sure if fans were there as well, you've just always got in the back of your head, I've got to get home here. The snow is still belting down. You think, well, this is how bad it was coming in. How am I going to get home? I was at that game. I absolutely maintain that game would never have got played if it wasn't live on the telly.
On Sky. Well, there's our weekly weather and traffic. We could make that a weekly feature. You were at Rockcliffe yesterday, Scott. We're gonna start with the West Ham stuff. Carrick was asked about and I guess is it even speculation? I don't know whether it's that strong yet or whether it's just kind of whispers really as to if Moyes goes, then Carrick might be on West Ham's radar. But anyway, how did Carrick's respond?
Yeah, I mean,
what did you make of it?
It's been bubbling along for the last 2 or 3 weeks, hasn't it? Moyes is clearly under pressure at West Ham. Fair enough, they won last night, didn't they, in the Conference League, so you suspect that might buy him a bit of time. They might actually win that competition looking at the teams that are in it. But anyway, regardless, he's under a bit of pressure. Names start being bandying around, and I think it originally came from the kind of London end of things, that the suggestion is that Carrick would be potentially one that they would be very interested in looking at if Moyes was to go. Now, in the last week or so, you've also had the Spurs situation bubbling along, obviously, with Conte. It doesn't look like he's staying, and, there's been a little bit of there. So, in these situations, the kind of question has to be asked. And obviously, at Boro, because of everything that happened with Chris Wilder, it's a bit of a political hot potato, isn't it? How do these questions get answered? So the question was put to Mike. It was actually put. So the way that the press conferences work is there's a TV section kind of first, and then the written guys or ladies come on the end of that. And it was asked in the TV section. He was kind of asked, look, this is out there, speculation whirling around West Ham. And I thought he handled it really, really well, obviously in a massive contrast to the way that things got badly out of hand under Chris Wilder. He basically said, look, yes, I'm flattered. I don't listen to these things, but I'm obviously aware of what's flying around. In fairness to Carrick, he's had this all his career, hasn't he? He's not used to being linked with things that might be true, might not be true, whatever. So, he kind of said all of that, but then he very strongly, pretty unequivocally said, but look, why on earth would I want to leave this? I'm here at Boro. I'm loving where I'm at. I'm completely focused on having the best end of the season we can possibly have, bring it on effectively. So, what he's done is he's put it to bed, until or unless David Moyes is sacked, and there's a very, very strong indication that West Ham want to get permission from Boro to speak to him, then clearly the question has to be asked again. But for the intervening period, that's been put to bed now. Yes, he's aware of it. Obviously, he's flattered. He's been linked with Premier League jobs 6 months into being a manager. That's fantastic for anybody, but he's massively committed to the job that he's got on at Boro. And I think that's just, judging by the reaction on social media to the piece I wrote off the back of it, I think that's what Boro fans wanted to hear, because it's what they wanted to hear from Chris Wilder, and they never got that, did they?
Well, this is the thing. I don't necessarily want to turn this into this is what you should have done.
Yeah.
Wilder. But then equally, it's impossible to ignore those comparisons, isn't it? And there's no Boro fan who expects Michael Carrick to say, I'm here for life. This, I love this club. Yeah. Do you know what I mean? All fans are realistic, but what you want is a bit of commitment and a bit of loyalty, don't you, back from your manager? And there's a way to answer those questions, isn't there? Chris Wilder showed how not to do it, and I think Michael Carrick showed how you do it.
Which was the massive surprise with Chris Wilder, because he's, in some ways, it's a trap for a rookie manager to fall into, isn't it? You would have expected Carrick potentially to wrap himself up in knots in it, because it's the first time he's had this kind of thing leveled at him as a manager. Chris Wilder's had this for 10 years, throughout his managerial career. So that's what made it so staggering, again, without constantly raking over all ground. That's what made it so staggering with the Wilder thing, that he knew inside out how to answer that question fairly easily and put it in a box, and he didn't. And it was incredibly hard not to then draw the conclusion, well, the only reason that he doesn't want to put it in a box is because he is interested and he is looking to get away. And obviously that then coloured the entire last 2-3 months of Wilder's reign, probably longer. So, it's a question that had to be asked because it's out there. I think the fans wanted it asking. As far as I'm concerned, like I say, it's put to bed now. He's made a really good job of answering it, of being honest, of showing his commitment to Boro, and that's probably that now, until or unless the situation at either West Ham or Spurs markedly changes, isn't it?
And the thing is, we're not representing Michael Carrick. We're not Michael Carrick's agents. But at any stage, when he comes to make the next stage in his career, it's clearly going to be he has to make the right step, doesn't he? It's still very early doors, isn't it? He's still learning, and he's still on an absolute upward trajectory with Boro, wouldn't he? It's daft at this stage to even consider jumping ship anyway, wouldn't it?
It would. It would. I only slightly caveat that with, managers. Michael Carrick's on an absolute, he's everything's rosy in the world of Michael Carrick at the moment. It won't always be. Managers do have ups and downs when you kind of least expect them to. And so, I would never necessarily kind of question a manager's desire to to look to better themselves. Now, as you say, it's a very, very early stage in Michael Carrick's career, and he's in a great place for him to grow and evolve and learn. But playing devil's advocate, if Boro weren't to get promoted this season, and West Ham were still a Premier League club and were to throw a load of money at him and say, we want to invest, we want to do this, we want to do it, then that becomes a different question, doesn't it? But you're right. At the moment, 11 games out from the end of a season that could end in absolutely massive success, I agree, it will be absolute madness for Michael Carrick to think of jumping ship for anything at the minute, because, you know, this is the perfect stage for him to A, grow and evolve, but B, just have a massive success at the start of his managerial career. Now, by the summer, like I say, depending on what happens with Boro, also depending on what happens with West Ham or Spurs, things might look a little bit different, and there might be more of a decision to be made then. But yeah, if West Ham were to have sacked David Moyes last night because they got thrashed in Cyprus or whatever, I agree. I think it would have been madness for Michael Carrick to jump into that at this stage of the season, at this stage of his career.
We touched on Chris Wilder earlier, so let's get to the point. He's at Watford for now. Well, yeah, he was when we started this video. Their third head coach of the season.
Might have changed now. What are we? We're about 15 minutes in nearly. So you know.
Yeah, Rob Edwards and Slaven Bilic, the 10th, 9th. Sorry, looking at the table there below us. He was clearly desperate to get back into work, wasn't he? He started doing interviews. He started appearing on 5 Live quite frequently. I mean, a job at the top end of the Championship is not to be sniffed at, but then it's Watford, isn't it? And I look back to when Chris Wilder joined Boro and him talking about the journey and the long-term project and this and that. Well, all that goes out the window when you take charge at Watford, doesn't it?
It's not that. I mean, what it is for him, I think, to a certain degree, is it's a free pass, really, because Watford are generally seen as a basket case in terms of the way that they just completely go through managers. They haven't had a particularly great season in terms of what they would have wanted at the start of it. If Chris Wilder gets them into the playoffs, that'll do, won't it, really, in terms of where they're at now? If he fails to get them into the playoff, then he's got the get out of where they weren't in the playoffs when I got there. I tried my best. This squad needs a massive overhaul. If he gets sacked at whatever stage, well, he's just another manager that's got sacked by Watford. That's what they do. So I fully understand why he's taking it. And like I say, I think it is a bit of a shot to nothing for him, because he either gets them into the playoffs and potentially gets them promoted, in which case it's a massive success, or he doesn't. And it's like, well, I'm the third manager this season. The other two couldn't do it. So there's something clearly wrong here. I mean, what I would say with Watford is I think they've kind of been the template of how not to do it when you get relegated, really. And that it's, you know, you looked at Watford at the start of the season and you thought, okay, they've got Ismail Assar, they've got João Pedro, they're going to be the 2 best players in the Championship. They'll run rings around people, they'll wipe the floor with them. Well, actually, they're probably the 2 types of players that you don't want when you get relegated, do you? Big earning, probably on 10 times what some of the other players in the dressing room are on, think that they should be playing in the Champions League, never mind the Premier League. They're not going to be putting it in when their backs are to the wall. And that feels with me what that Watford squad has been. It's a classic relegated squad that's got a few Premier League players who haven't been able to get away when they want to get away, a few players who weren't good enough, and that's why they got relegated, and then some younger ones who have come in to try and flesh out the squad, and it just hasn't hung together. So, you know, I don't see that Chris Wilder will have any kind of a magic wand that he can go in and wave and suddenly that squad's going to be transformed. That said, you know, they're not far off the playoffs, are they? It's not inconceivable that they get in there and then anything can happen. So for all of those reasons, I understand why he's taking it. I think it's a decent chance for him, because, like I say, if it all goes horribly wrong, I don't necessarily think that'll be pinned on Chris Wilder.
You do wonder whether and I don't know whether they work like this at Watford, but whether they're regretting the early decision to get rid of Rob Edwards, because he's done an excellent job at Luton since he's got him there. The few things he's taken, I'd seen yesterday, Wilder's taken Alan Neil and Matt Prestridge in with him, who were his kind of backroom team lieutenants for a little while, haven't they? They start at QPR on Saturday, which is a kind game. QPR are in free fall, aren't they? Even under Gareth Ainsworth so far. And they are due to play Huddersfield Town, which I can't imagine they'll be sharing a red wine, Warnock and Wilder, after that one.
That will be an interesting one, won't it? Yeah, I think we all know from the Boro days that there's no love lost there, is there? Obviously, Watford don't play Boro, do they? They've already played them, unless it was to be in the playoffs. So we won't get Wilder back at the Riverside this season. But yeah, Wilder Warnock on the touchline will be interesting. It'll be like the McCarthy-Keane handshake that I covered all the years back for Wolves when Wolves played Sunderland. It was the first time they met. It'll be a kind of like this, looking that way, shake that way, off you go.
Yeah, for a fact both of those managers will already have eyes on that game, don't you?
Yeah,
for different reasons, because Warnock's obviously got a whole host of problems there at Huddersfield. Swansea this weekend then. Just going back to the press conference yesterday, first thing with Paddy McNair, what's the situation there? Do you expect to be available?
So it was a bit more positive than it had been, in that Michael Carrick was saying he is back in and around, but he is still going through the concussion protocols. And obviously, for very obvious reasons, they can't be rushed. So I think he was hopeful that there was a chance that he could be back in the squad this weekend. But it certainly wasn't copper bottomed. And I think today he's got certain things that he has to kind of get ticked and signed off. And then he can join back in. Now, from that, you would take the fact that he probably hasn't been in proper full training this week. So that would suggest to me that even if he is in the squad, it'll probably be on the bench. There doesn't seem a real burning reason to drop Dale Fry for him if he's not really trained that much. So no, obviously it's interesting because Ramsey did so well last weekend. Do you take him out? My gut reaction is that we'll go back to the kind of team that's been for most of the time under Carrick, which would be Fours, Akpom, McGree, Archer, with Howson and Hackney behind them. That would be harsh on Ramsey, obviously being left out after what he did last week. But you just wonder, away from home, against the Swansea side who like to get the ball down and move it. I would be surprised if it wasn't Fours and McGree again.
It's interesting that, isn't it? Because if Boro were to play a playoff final, say this coming weekend, say they get there at the end of the season, you could already have a real good crack at naming the team, couldn't you? The only question marks would maybe be whether it's McNair and Fry, although I think you'd lean towards Fry. And the only other one, I think, is probably whether it'd be Force or Ramsey on the right side. Now, a lot can change between now and the end of the season, but other than that, you can't see, you couldn't predict any other changes. That has the feel of his team, doesn't it?
It does. I guess in the next 2 months, is there a chance that Barlaser could come in and really stake a claim? Possibly. Although I think, you would imagine that if push came to shove in a real must-win game, that Howson and Hackney would be his default option, and deservedly so, given the way they've been playing. Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, the fullbacks look nailed on. Lenihan looks nailed on. Like you say, Fry or McGree, Stefan's nailed on. Akpom's clearly nailed on. Archer's nailed on because there's not really an obvious option, up there. Can't imagine that Crooks would displace him in a game that Boro really had to win. So yeah, I think you're right. I think it would, three of them could get injured between now and then. So that's the caveat, obviously. But yeah, if everyone's available, I think you're right. I think, in terms of the first choice, I think the only options are the centre half alongside Lenihan. And like you say, does Ramsey get in? And if so, Force or McGree drops out.
We touched on Swansea earlier in the week, but we'll have a bit more of a detailed look at it now, given that we're at the back end of the week and it's here. They'll try and play against Boro, won't they? Do you think that plays into Boro's hands?
I think it does. I think it does certainly in an away game like this. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because it's only when I'd kind of done a little bit of proper digging in it this week. I hadn't realised just how much pressure Russell Martin's under down there. They're talking about 1-2 games away from the sack, really. So, by all accounts, the mood is potentially going to be fairly mutinous in that ground tomorrow. So, I think Boro clearly have to use that to their favour. Yeah, Swansea, they've all, since the Roberto Martinez days, really, they've always been a side who have looked to get the ball down, play, neat passing. And you would imagine that because the crowd are kind of so ready to turn, they'll have to try and be on the front foot. They'll have to try and play to Boro. So you would like to think that will leave gaps in behind. And if Boro can get the ball and look to break, there should be opportunities there. That's the way that I would see the game panning out. And then obviously if Boro can get on top and get the crowd turning, then it becomes a really difficult day for those Swansea players, you would hope. So that I would think would be the kind of ploy going into it. Now, interestingly, Boro's record at Swansea is horrendous. They haven't won in the last 7. I think the last win, I think Tunchai scored one of the, it was 3-0 away win. I think Tunchai, so that's the kind of era we're talking about. This was put to Carrick yesterday, and in fairness, he gave the answer you'd kind of expect him to give, which is, look, different teams, different. I was going
to say that. Do you think that matters?
I mean, a little bit. I think it does. I think there are certain grounds that, for whatever reason, teams just regularly underperform at. Now, it might be because of the way that the opposition tends to set up. It might be. It's difficult because when you're covering clubs in the Premier League, so when Boro were in the Premier League, or when I'm covering Newcastle in the Premier League, they've got a dreadful record at the Etihad. Well, yeah, everybody has.
Everybody does.
They never win at Stamford Bridge. Well, nobody wins it. So that's a bit different, isn't it? But I think there are just sometimes little quirks. I know fans latch onto it, and you're right. It should make absolutely no difference. Why should Cameron Archer give any kind of a hoot
as to how Boro got on at the Liberty in 2005
years ago?
Yeah,
it should make absolutely no difference to him whatsoever. I get that, but I don't know. It's a part of the football fan psyche, I think, isn't it? That it is there. It is there that there's certain places you go and you think, oh God.
Well, it's like we were mentioning it with Steve when we had Steve Crossman last week. Well, like those strikers who always score against Boro. Like, and some of them, when you actually look at the record, like they don't really, but it's just they might have scored in like successive wins, and you suddenly start to fear those.
Well, that's it. And I mean, obviously, Boro have played Swansea at various times when Swansea have been competing for the playoffs and have had really good teams. So, it shouldn't mean anything. But I think as a football fan and us as football writers, it's there, isn't it? It is just there.
When you say that, it shouldn't mean anything. Michael Carrick didn't seem too concerned about the fact he didn't win Manager of the Month. Vincent Kompany won it for the 3rd month in a row.
Yeah.
But I was surprised Akpom didn't win the Player Award. Again, I mean, he's got bigger fish to fry, hasn't he? But
he has, but I agree with that. I mean, Burnley have been so dominant and so good that it's kind of hard to quibble when Kompany keeps winning these awards, because they are the best team in the league. They haven't lost since God knows when. So, but you're right. I mean, Akpom has been standing head and shoulders for me above anyone else in the league. I keep coming back to this, with the possible exception of Gyökeres, who I do think is the best number 9 in the league, and is probably the player more than anyone else who is absolutely fundamentally integral to the team he's playing at, who are actually doing right.
Tony Mowbray described him as the Championship's Erling Haaland.
He did, yeah. He did. I mean, if you take him out with that Coventry team, they are diminished by 50% straight away. You know what I mean? I'm not sure there's too many more players in the Championship that are that integral to a team. So I'd have him up there. But you're right. What more can Akpom do? What more does he have to do to kind of win these awards? But then again, I know they'll say that they don't, and I know that obviously Kompany keeps on winning it, but you get the impression with the player one that they probably like to swap it around a bit and give different players and different clubs a bit of a look in. I think there probably is an element of that. They don't want the same player winning it month after month after month.
We've got 24 minutes in and we haven't talked about Sheffield United, which I think is a record for us. So
that is a record. Before
we wrap up, predictions this weekend for Swansea Boro and for Sheffield United.
Yeah,
it's the start of a big week, isn't it? It's a 3-game week, or 3 games in 8 days. Because I know Mark Drury of BBC Tees hates 3-game week. For Boro, it looks like an opportunity with 2 home games to come against Stoke and Preston, whereas Sheffield United play Sunderland. They've got Norwich next weekend, so it could. It's 7 points again now after their win at Reading, but things could change quite dramatically again in the next 8 days.
Yeah, so there's a few. I mean, I think tonight's game is a big one. First up, Stoke-Blackburn. I think that's interesting because Stoke obviously absolutely annihilated Sunderland last weekend, and are a dangerous team under Neil. They underperform, but when they click, they click. So I think that is a difficult game for Blackburn. If Blackburn go and win at Stoke tonight, I think and obviously that would put them above Boro going into tomorrow's games. Then I think that will be a big statement from Blackburn to say, look, we're still in this top 2 battle. I think if they go and lose at Stoke tonight, then you'd say, okay, that's probably them out of the top 2 race. But if they go and win that, then they're absolutely banging it. So that's the first thing. Then Sheffield United. I mean, they've had that wobble, haven't they? They obviously were well beaten by Boro, but they're still 7 points clear. That's still a pretty sizable gap. If they can come out of, if you offered them now, I would imagine 4 points from Luton at home and Sunderland away, they'd snap your hands off, wouldn't they? That would do them. And then, worst case scenario, Boro win both the games, the gap's still 5. Even 3 points would not really be a disaster for them because Boro would still have to do back-to-back wins to get the gap back to 4. I think if you're in the situation where Sheffield United don't win either of those games, then that is a real issue for them. And Boro really would, hopefully, have won their games and have massive momentum, and the gap would be significantly reduced. So, yeah, I think what there's 11 left now, isn't there? So after these back-to-back games after midweek, we're down to 9. So if the gap between the two sides was still 7 points with 9 games left, then that really is starting to get hard to see. Then if Boro can make any kind of a chink in it, a dent in it rather, then that will be a good week's work for them, wouldn't it?
We'll see what this weekend brings. Well, thanks again for following along, and keep an eye on your podcast platforms, because You Are My Boroughs should start dropping as podcasts wherever you get your podcast from in the next week or so, fingers crossed. But please remember to like along, subscribe to our YouTube channel, and then you'll get alerts and notifications of when we go live and when the new videos drop. And we'll be back early next week to hopefully reflect on another Boro win.
Keep an eye on the A1, M1, M42, M5 traffic alerts as well, because I could definitely break the world record for the drive to Swansea today, I reckon. And but on a more serious note, safe travels to any of the Boro fans who are going down tomorrow, because that really is a monumental effort, whether you're travelling down today or in the morning. Good luck. I saw the buses were leaving at 6 in the morning, I think. So,
safe travels.
Enjoy.
I hope you get a win.
Exactly.